Hey guys, welcome back to Dreamless Timelines for Sleep. Tonight, we're drifting into the Middle Ages, a place where everyone smelled faintly of stew, wood smoke, and mild despair. So, dim the lights, loosen whatever modern gadget is still glued to your hand. And let's take a quiet float back to a world where Wi-Fi didn't exist, and neither did deodorant. Life in medieval Europe was, let's just say, not built for 21st century comfort levels. You'd wake up in what people generously called a house. Basically, a smoky wooden box packed with humans, chickens, and a goat or two. The floor was literally dirtened, the air was thick with whatever last night's dinner had become overnight. There's no bed. Just a hay pile that pokes you in places hay shouldn't. The fire in the corner never goes out because, if it does, you'll freeze and also spend half the morning trying to spark it again with 2 damp rocks and a prayer. You open your eyes to the sound of someone coughing, because everyone is coughing. You reach for water, realize it'll probably kill you, and instead take a sip of weak ale. Congratulations, you're buzzed before breakfast. Everyone is, and no one finds that weird. Your breakfast is yesterday's bread, which now doubles as a self-defense weapon, soaked in more ale to make it chewable. You spend the first 10 minutes wondering how this planet survived long enough to invent toothpaste. Spoiler, it didn't. Not yet. Cleanliness, meanwhile, is optional. People don't hate baths exactly, they just think water might be plotting against them. The logic is flawless. Water spreads disease, so clearly the best defense is never touching it. So you wash with a dry cloth, a prayer, and maybe a sprinkle of holy water if you're extra fancy. Your teeth? A little salt, maybe a burnt herb, maybe wine if you're rich. Which, to be fair, sounds like half the dental advice on the internet. The average medieval street smells like every bad decision humanity ever made. Chamber pots emptied out the window. Garbage tossed wherever. Animals doing animal things right in the middle of the road. Someone shouts, "Gardy Lou," which loosely translates to duck, incoming waste, and a bucket of mystery liquid splashes onto the cobblestones. You tell yourself it's just rain. It's not. Food isn't much better. If you're a peasant, you live on bread, onions, porridge, and existential dread. Meat appears maybe once a year, and you spend the rest of the time telling stories about it. The nobles are technically eating better, but most of their food is halfway rotten. They just drown it in spicy cinnamon, cloves, pepper because medieval cooking was really just creative deodorizing. Forks haven't joined the party yet, so everyone eats with their hands and pretends that sleeves are napkins. The ale keeps flowing because the water still hates you, and even toddlers are sipping it like tiny functional drunks. Dessert. Maybe honey, maybe imagination. Sugar costs more than land, if you somehow made it to the upper class. Congratulations, you've upgraded from mud hut to damp stone fortress. Your castle is cold, your servants are suspicious, and the walls drip condensation all winter. You have servants to light fires and carry chamber pots. But they also gossip about how weird you are, which, statistically, is fair. Nobility means endless politics, arranged marriages, and pretending to like relatives you're probably marrying. Half the royal family tree looks like a circle. You eat better food, but you also get new diseases like gout and royal melancholy, which basically means being sad and rich at the same time. Daily life revolves around work. If you're not noble, you're farming someone else's field from sunrise to sunset. No weekends, no sick leave, just wheat, mud, and taxes. The church tells you it's all for God, which helps absolutely nobody except the church. Soldiers have it worse. Armor weighs as much as a teenager. Swords are dull. And most wars end not from victory, but from everyone catching something awful in the camp. Medicine is mostly herbs, superstition, and whatever the local monk dreamed about last night. The best cure for anything is either prayer or leeches. Sometimes both. When night finally shows up, you go to bed, which means collapsing on straw that hasn't been changed since Easter. People don't even sleep in one stretch. They have a first sleep and a second sleep, with a few hours of quiet in between for prayer, gossip, or midnight panic about damnation. Candles made from animal fat fill the room with a faint bacon scent, which is charming if you ignore the soot. Dreams are divine messages or demonic temptations, depending on how interesting they get. And yet, somehow, everyone just keeps going. They farm, they fight, they marry cousins, they build cathedrals that scrape the clouds, and they survive long enough to make us. But if you, modern person of hot showers and phone chargers, ever found yourself dropped here, you wouldn't last until lunch. Between the smell, the hunger, and the fleas staging a coup in your bed, you'd be begging for a quick time travel refund. So close your eyes, take a breath, and be quietly thankful for plumbing, soap, and filtered water. You'd never make it in medieval Europe, but it's fun to visit in your dreams. Hey guys, welcome back. You made it through the peasants, the dirt floors, and the medieval ale hangovers. Impressive. Tonight, let's glide a little higher up the food chain to the castles, crowns, and catastrophes, otherwise known as European royalty. Because if you think being royal back then meant glamour, gold, and good skincare, you're in for a long, itchy surprise. The truth is, being royal in the Middle Ages was a lot like being famous, now except instead of paparazzi. You had cousins trying to stab you for your throne, and instead of brand deals, you had arranged marriages with someone who might also be your uncle. So, get cozy. Tonight, we're visiting the kind of royal families you wouldn't survive serving, or even standing near for too long. Let's start with the basics. Medieval royalty were basically professional soap operas in human form. The family trees, more like family vines, twisted in every direction. Everyone married cousins to keep the bloodline pure, which is historical code for make genetics cry. It all started with good intentions alliances, power, shared kingdoms, but it ended with chin deformities, weak chests, and a medical record that reads like a Greek tragedy. You couldn't toss a gold goblet in Europe without hitting someone who is both your third cousin and your fiancé. Take the Habsburgs, for example, the unofficial mascots of royal inbreeding. These people made cousin marriage into an Olympic sport. They were obsessed with keeping their empire united by blood, which, sure, works fine until you realize it's the same blood looping around forever. The famous Habsburg jaw, that long, droopy chin you see in portraits, wasn't an artistic choice. It was the genetic result of too many family reunions doubling as weddings. By the time Charles II of Spain was born in the 17th century, the poor guy was basically a walking family tree with teeth. He couldn't chew properly, he couldn't talk clearly, and his doctors described him as weak in body and spirit, which is the polite medieval way of saying this dynasty is done. But we're not in Spain yet. Let's float back to England, land of muddy thrones and moody monarchs. The English kings were a revolving door of ambition, scandal, and terrible life choices. Henry II spent most of his reign arguing with the church, then accidentally got his friend Thomas Becket killed in a cathedral, which, as PR disasters go, was not ideal. Then there was King John, the guy everyone hated so much they made him sign the Magna Carta just to get him to stop being awful. He taxed everything, lost wars, starved prisoners, and possibly lost the crown jewels in a swamp, which, symbolically, was kinda perfect. And if you're thinking, well, maybe the later kings were better, let me introduce you to Henry VIII. The man who treated marriage like a medieval subscription, plants ex-wives, all with different outcomes, most of them bad. He started off as charming, handsome, athletic, the Tudor golden boy. Then came years of paranoia, gout, and questionable decisions. When the church wouldn't let him divorce his first wife, he just invented a new church. That's commitment. He accused wives of cheating, beheaded 2 of them, and died so bloated they couldn't fit him in his coffin without it. Leaking romantic, right? Meanwhile, his daughter Mary earned the nickname Bloody Mary for trying to reverse her father's religious chaos by burning people alive, which feels a little overcorrected. If you were a servant in these courts, your job wasn't just polishing silverware. It was surviving the emotional weather of whichever monarch woke up that morning. You'd bow, smile, and hope they didn't decide you looked too much like someone who wronged them in a dream. Court life was equal parts boring and terrifying. You might spend 10 hours waiting outside a door just to hand a letter to a guy who might exile you for blinking too loud. Across the channel in France, things weren't much better. Medieval French kings had the same problem. Too much power, not enough self-awareness. Charles VI, for instance, went completely insane. At one point, he believed he was made of glass. Not metaphorically, literally. He wore reinforced clothes to keep from shattering and banned people from touching him. The royal court just went along with it because telling the king he's not made of glass was a good way to lose your head. His reign turned France into a half-functioning circus where nobles ruled by proxy while the king tiptoed around, terrified of breaking himself. And then there was Louis XIV, the so-called Sun King. He came later, but the energy was the same. Everything revolved around him. His Palace Versailles was the ultimate royal flex. Golden halls, endless mirrors, and gardens bigger than some countries. It was gorgeous, sure, but also incredibly stinky. People forget that plumbing wasn't part of the design. Guests at Versailles often just used corners or stairwells as bathrooms. Imagine the smell of hundreds of nobles in wigs and silk sweating under candlelight. The Sun King bathed rarely but wore gallons of perfume because apparently that balanced out. Back to the earlier days, the royal marriage market was pure chaos. You didn't marry for love. You married for land, troops, or strategic babies. A 10-year-old could be engaged to a 40-year-old king, and everyone would call it diplomacy. Queens were expected to smile, wave, and produce heirs until they dropped. If you didn't give birth to a boy, congratulations, you just became a political liability. Medieval medicine didn't help either. Childbirth was basically a gamble with death, and if you survived, you were lucky enough to do it again next year. Let's float north for a moment to the frozen drama of medieval Scandinavia, where everyone was both royal and slightly unhinged. The Viking Age kings of Norway and Denmark made English rulers look stable. Harold Bluetooth, yes, the one your phone is named after, united Denmark and Norway through equal parts diplomacy and stabbing. Later, kings carried that legacy proudly, which mostly meant a lot of war, bad weather, and dynasties that kept splitting apart because no one could agree who got which fjord. Meanwhile, the Holy Roman Empire, which, as people love to remind us, was neither Holy Roman nor much of an empire. You had dozens of mini-kings pretending to cooperate. They held imperial diets, basically giant political dinners where everyone argued and nothing happened. The emperor's job was like being the world's most overpaid referee. And again, most of them were Habsburgs, so the chin situation was ongoing. Even religion didn't make things better. Monarchs constantly fought with the Pope over who was in charge. Spoiler, it was usually the Pope, at least spiritually. But kings loved pretending divine power answered directly to them. It made tax collection easier. Whole wars were fought over whose invisible friend was more legitimate. The Crusades, for instance, were basically Europe's collective midlife crisis, thousands marching off to the Holy Land to prove faith. Find loot or just get out of another bad harvest season. If you were a servant during all this, your job was equal parts flattery and survival. You never looked the king in the eye too long. You never mentioned the queen's age. You never corrected anyone's history, even when it was clearly wrong. You lived on the edge of constant royal mood, swings one moment being rewarded with gold, the next exiled to a swamp for sneezing near the crown. And yet, somehow, people still wanted to be close to power. Maybe it was the silk, or the banquets, or just the idea that standing near royalty made you matter. It didn't, really. It just made you disposable. Most monarchs treated their courts like personal stages. Everyone else just props in the grand performance of ego, so no. You wouldn't want to serve these kings and queens. You'd be tired, anxious, slightly malnourished, and always one rumor away from execution. But you'd also have front-row seats to some of the most absurd human theater ever staged. You'd watch a king argue with a bishop about whether God preferred Latin prayers or English ones. A queen pretend her husband wasn't slowly losing his mind, and courtiers fake laughter so hard they probably sprained something. Still, in the soft candlelight of a medieval night, the castles glowed like something out of a dream. The tapestries waved gently, the fires crackled, and behind all the noise and fear, there was an eerie beauty. You might not last a day in medieval times, but lying there, staring up at a smoky ceiling while a mad king shouted at ghosts down the hall, you'd almost start to feel the rhythm of it all. The weight of history pressing softly against sleep. So close your eyes, drift with me through those echoing stone halls, and imagine the whisper of silk and secrets fading into the dark. The royals ruled their crumbling worlds, and we, lucky time travelers, get to watch from a safe, cozy distance. Let's keep drifting next time, deeper into the twisted, tragic beauty of medieval love, loyalty, and very questionable genetics. Hey guys, welcome back. You've survived the mud, the ale, and the catastrophically inbred courts so far. So tonight, we're drifting into the romantic disasters of medieval royalty. And when I say romantic disasters, I mean it literally. These are the people who treated love like a board game with rules they kept forgetting, dice that were loaded, and consequences that usually involved a dagger, a forced marriage, or a particularly dramatic fainting spell. Get cozy, because these stories are long, flat, and perfect for slowly drifting towards sleep. Let's start with a concept you might not fully appreciate today. Love didn't really exist for royals. It was optional. Marriage was a contract, and your happiness was somewhere in the footnotes. The classic example is Eleanor of Aquitaine, who married Louis VII of France at the age of 15. She was beautiful, clever, politically savvy, and completely trapped in a marriage that didn't even pretend to be fun. Louis, meanwhile, spent most of his time whining about how she wasn't enough, like a nun, because apparently that was the benchmark for medieval wives. Eleanor eventually got tired of his whiny, pious energy, divorced him, and married Henry II of England, because why not double down on dynastic chaos? She produced 8 children, most of whom would go on to be kings and queens with their own messes. Imagine raising 8 kids when everyone around you might also be plotting to kill you, and you have to share them with 2 empires. It's basically reality TV on steroids. Meanwhile, Henry II was busy being Henry II. He loved Eleanor in a complicated, slightly terrifying way, and also hated her, probably for being too competent. He had mistresses, and Eleanor knew. She even encouraged rebellion from their sons, because, well, what's a little family mutiny if it's stylish and historically significant? And through it all, the court was a stage of whispering nobles, plotting bishops, and children who probably couldn't trust anyone older than their dog. Then there's the English king, Richard I, aka Richard the Lionheart. He's famous for being a crusader, which mostly meant leaving his kingdom in the hands of incompetent regents while he chased glory in the Holy Land. His romantic life? Minimal. He married Berengaria of Navarre, who he apparently never met before the wedding, because travel and protocol in the 12th century were complicated. She followed him across Europe on a slow, slightly terrifying tour. And history politely notes that Richard had little time for wifely duties. Translation: she was mostly sightseeing while he fought a bunch of wars. Across the channel, French royalty wasn't doing any better. Philip IV, for instance, had a marriage that was legally sound but emotionally barren. His wife, Joan I of Navarre, was a political partner, which is lovely if you like being ignored at parties and having your opinions treated like state secrets. Their love letters, if they exist, probably read like tax forms with occasional sighs. They had children, of course, and those children went on to repeat the pattern with enthusiasm. The entire dynasty looked like a long conveyor belt of arranged misery, punctuated by occasional historical notes about someone fainting at court or dying of measles. Now, let's float to the continent of Italy, where the Renaissance hadn't quite started yet, but the drama was alive and well. Italian princes and duchesses married for wealth, art commissions, and territory, not affection. Consider Ludovico Sforza, who married Beatrice d'Este. She was cultured, politically sharp, and apparently very good at court intrigue. Ludovico, on the other hand, spent more time managing mercenaries, painting, and flirting with disaster. Beatrice had to play along, managing diplomacy while also surviving Ludovico's erratic whims. Their love. Probably somewhere between "we tolerate each other" and "please don't poison me tonight," which, in context, counts as functional. If you were a young royal child watching all this unfold, life was complicated. You'd be taught that love is optional, obedience is mandatory, and your eventual marriage will either consolidate power or give you a lingering sense of existential dread. Girls were taught to be graceful, quiet, and politically useful. Boys were taught to be brave, strong, and occasionally murderous if needed. Siblings could be allies one day and mortal enemies the next. Everyone had a favorite uncle or aunt who might also be your cousin. Genetics and loyalty didn't mix well, and the family portraits make it painfully obvious. Even when there was affection, it came with conditions. Queens sometimes loved their husbands, but it didn't matter if the king preferred hunting, crusading, or ignoring her entirely. Princes sometimes adored their wives, but it didn't matter if she had the wrong bloodline or too many opinions. Love in the medieval court was conditional, transactional, and often deadly. Emotional meltdowns were common. There were reported cases of queens sobbing quietly while plotting revenge, princes wandering corridors in despair, and courtiers trying not to inhale too deeply because someone just passed gas in the room. Life was full of small, persistent miseries, punctuated by occasional moments of elegance. And then there's the issue of mistresses, which were practically mandatory for kings. They were tolerated, celebrated, and occasionally made formal guests at court. If you were the wife, you had to smile, wave, and ensure the children's legitimacy while silently building your own political network. If you were the mistress, you had power without responsibility till the king got bored, decided you'd served your purpose, and moved on. It was basically medieval HR in a nightmare office where everyone was armed. Arranged marriages across Europe also led to some interesting cross-cultural experiments. A French princess might be married to an English prince she's never met, speak a different language, and be expected to manage a household of 50 servants while producing heirs. She might develop a cough from the damp castle walls, catch a plague from a visiting noble, or slowly go insane from the boredom of courtly life. Her letters back home, if they survived, read like passive-aggressive poetry disguised as diary entries. The walls are cold. My husband is lukewarm. I hope this letter reaches you before I do nothing else today. Even outside politics, royal love stories were tragic simply because life expectancy was low. Childbirth, disease, and sudden illness were constant threats. Queens might survive a few pregnancies, then succumb to puerperal fever. Princes could die of smallpox, measles, or a sword wound inflicted during a friendly sparring match. Marriages that looked perfect on paper often ended abruptly due to death or insanity, leaving the surviving spouse to navigate the court alone, haunted by memories and unpaid debts. So, if you're imagining being a medieval royal spouse, remember, your life is a carefully choreographed performance of decorum, obedience, and quiet panic. Your love, if it exists at all, is filtered through layers of politics, health hazards, and the unspoken threat of betrayal. And if you're not married, you're probably a child waiting to be auctioned off in a dynastic deal somewhere else in Europe. But there's a strange beauty in it, too. Even amidst the misery, the arranged marriages, and the constant threat of death. These people created art, commissioned buildings, wrote letters, and managed kingdoms. The courts were chaotic, emotionally exhausting, and occasionally horrifying, but they were alive with the pulse of human ambition, desire, and the quiet, grinding persistence of survival. So, as you drift further into sleep tonight, imagine walking silently through a medieval castle, listening to whispers of strategy, love, and betrayal, knowing you wouldn't survive a day here, but can enjoy the rhythm of their world from a safe, modern distance. Their love lives were tragic, messy, and often absurd, but from afar. They're a lullaby of human drama, the perfect background for sleep. Hey guys, welcome back. By now, you've floated past the peasants, the castles, and the dramatic, overcooked love lives of medieval royalty. So tonight, we're drifting into a world that's equal parts adorable and horrifying: medieval royal children. And when I say horrifying, I don't mean monsters or dragons. I mean tiny humans who are sick, stressed, overworked, and somehow expected to rule entire kingdoms before they could even tie their shoes or whatever medieval equivalent of shoes they had. So, get cozy, pull the blankets up, and let's drift gently into their small, strangely tragic worlds. Being a royal child in the Middle Ages was basically a full-time stakes apprenticeship in misery. You were born into wealth, sure, but wealth in this case meant a big target on your tiny head. Infant mortality was sky-high, even for the elite. You could be a prince or princess one day, and by tomorrow, a faint historical footnote. Parents worried constantly. Doctors did the medieval equivalent of guessing. And the closest thing to a toy was a carved wooden horse or a tiny rattle. Every cough, every rash, every sneeze was a potential disaster. And the entire court would hover anxiously, whispering, praying, and probably blaming someone random for bad luck. Royal children were expected to start training immediately. Boys were taught to handle swords, horses, and political gossip almost as soon as they could crawl. Girls learned etiquette, languages, embroidery, and, of course, how to prepare for a politically advantageous marriage. Playtime. Optional rest. Conditional. Education was rigorous, and every lesson came with the implicit knowledge that failure could be fatal or, at least politically inconvenient. You learned to read and write because one day you might need to sign decrees, send orders, or write letters threatening people you hadn't even met. Even play was dangerous. Outdoor games involved sharp sticks, rough terrain, and the constant supervision of adults who might decide you were either too clever or too clumsy. Minor accidents often turned serious because medical care was rudimentary at best. A cut could fester into infection, a broken bone might never set properly, and fevers were whispered about like dark omens. Somehow, despite all this, kids survive, though often smaller, frailer, and perpetually anxious compared to their modern equivalents. Food for royal children was also a mix of indulgence and terror. They were often given rich foods to ensure growth, like meat, pastries, and sweet treats, but medieval kitchens were imperfect. Spoiled meat, poorly baked bread, and contaminated water were all threats. Children ate what was given to them without complaint because complaining was dangerous, but it often led to upset stomachs, rashes, or long-term digestive problems. You were essentially a lab experiment in privilege and biology. Families often piled pressure on these tiny humans in subtle and not-so-subtle ways. Heirs were expected to embody the strength and wisdom of their dynasty even before they could walk. And failure to impress could result in political consequences. Siblings competed for attention, and favoritism could make or break a young life. The eldest son might be pampered and drilled in statecraft, while the youngest was ignored, experimented on, or married off to some random foreign noble in a bid for alliance. Emotional neglect by today's standards was standard operating procedure. And then there were the diseases. Smallpox, measles, diphtheria, scurvy, these lurked constantly. And royal children weren't immune just because they wore silk. Wet nurses, siblings, visitors, even toys could be carriers. Parents tried everything: charms, herbs, prayers, and elaborate rituals that, in hindsight, did little more than waste time. Some children survived, some didn't. And those who did often emerged pale, weak, and oddly fragile, carrying the emotional weight of family expectations alongside recurring fevers. Yet, despite all this, children in royal courts could also be spoiled beyond imagination. They had tutors, endless clothes, lavish toys, and attention from dozens of servants. Baths were rare, but the water they got was scented and warm. They had rooms filled with tapestries, carpets, and furniture that most adults couldn't even afford. But privilege didn't equal freedom. Their days were still structured, their mistakes punished, and their minor illnesses treated like state emergencies. Imagine being 7 years old, screaming because someone took your toy, and having the entire court panic about your delicate constitution. Some children were political pawns from birth. Marriages were arranged when they were mere infants. They might be betrothed to someone across Europe while still in diapers, all to cement alliances, claim territories, or prevent wars. Childhood was brief and transactional, and emotional connections were often secondary to strategy. If you cried too much, it could be read as weakness. If you laughed too much, it could be read as frivolity. The tiny human mind was constantly monitored for signs of potential dynasty failure. Education was intense, but peculiar. They were taught history, languages, manners, theology, and combat basics. Some children could read Latin fluently by age 7 while being incapable of simple arithmetic. Others might be physically strong but intellectually neglected. Tutors had the impossible task of turning these tiny beings into competent adults fast. Because waiting wasn't an option, the world moved quickly, diseases spread faster. And political enemies didn't care that your heir hadn't learned to tie his boots yet. Royal children often had complicated relationships with their parents. Some parents were loving, gentle, and attentive, but most were wrapped up in politics, alliances, and managing the court. Nannies and wet nurses often played a larger emotional role than the biological parents. Children might love their caretakers fiercely while being terrified of their own parents' moods. Favoritism was obvious. Jealousy rampant, and siblings could be both friends and rivals. Court life was a stage, and every child was both actor and prop. Despite all this, some survived, thrived, and went on to rule. Others faded into obscurity, their lives quietly ended by illness or misfortune. It was a world where the stakes were high before a child could even walk, talk, or understand what was happening. Their lives were fragile, absurd, and sometimes tragically brief, but they shaped the dynasties, wars, and alliances that defined Europe for centuries. So tonight, as you drift further into sleep, imagine a tiny prince or princess in a drafty castle room, pale, frail, surrounded by tapestries and whispering servants. Their destiny already written in stone and blood. They wouldn't survive a day outside their court, and you wouldn't survive a day in theirs. But here, in the quiet of your modern world, you can float alongside them safely, feeling the rhythm of their fragile lives fading into history. Hey guys, welcome back. By now, you've floated past the peasants, the royal disasters, and the tiny, overworked heirs. So tonight, we're gliding gently into a world of medieval court scandals. And when I say scandals, I don't mean tabloids with Photoshop. I mean real-life, absurdly dramatic events that involved kings, queens, courtiers, and enough bad decisions to fill an entire castle library. So, get cozy, adjust your pillows, and let's drift slowly through the chaos of medieval nobility. Courts were essentially drama factories. Every day brought gossip, intrigue, and political maneuvers that could ruin someone's life in seconds. Take, for instance, Queen Isabella of France, a woman so clever that she managed to topple her husband, Edward II of England. Edward was weak, indulgent, and utterly convinced that his favorites men named Gaveston and Spencer were more important than ruling a kingdom. Isabella didn't agree. She plotted, gathered allies, and eventually led a rebellion that replaced Edward with their son. History remembers her as brilliant. But let's be honest, the court probably smelled faintly of betrayal and sweat the entire time. Then there's the case of the papal schisms, which are technically religious, but also pure scandal. Multiple popes claiming the same throne, excommunications flying around like confetti, and noble families picking sides as if it were a medieval sports league. Kings and queens took sides to protect their own interests, which meant alliances changed faster than anyone could say heresy. Courtiers were left running back and forth, delivering letters, whispering warnings, and pretending they weren't terrified. The entire continent essentially ran on gossip, fear, and the hope that God would be merciful enough not to notice the chaos. Back in France, the 100 Years' War gave rise to some of the most absurd court antics. Charles VI, the king who thought he was made of glass, had courtiers tiptoe around him constantly. Some nobles would throw themselves on the floor in fear that even the wrong glance could shatter him. Meanwhile, the real fighting was happening on the battlefields, where strategy, luck, and the occasional poorly aimed arrow determined who would live and who would become a cautionary tale. The court, however, was equally deadly in its own way. Favor, rumor, or an ill-timed sneeze could get someone exiled or executed. Scandals weren't just political, they were sometimes wildly personal. Kings had mistresses, queens had secret lovers, and courtiers often engaged in duels over minor insults. One of the most famous stories involves a noblewoman in England whose love letters were intercepted by the king. Instead of a quiet confrontation, he forced her to publicly confess at court, humiliating her while his advisors nodded solemnly. The lesson was clear. In a medieval court, privacy was non-existent, and personal errors were public theater. In Italy, the courts of Florence, Milan, and Venice were playgrounds for political and romantic scandals. Marriages were arranged to consolidate power, but extramarital affairs were tolerated if they came with discretion and influence. Secret meetings in gardens, hidden letters delivered by servants, and whispered plots formed the undercurrent of every elegant banquet. The wealthier the court, the more elaborate the schemes. A minor mistake could spark feuds that lasted generations, and a clever strategist could turn gossip into gold. Scandals could also involve simple human errors, amplified by circumstance. Imagine a prince, drunk at a banquet, accidentally insulting the wrong noble family, or a queen, fainting at an inopportune moment during a negotiation. These seemingly small incidents could spiral into full-blown court crises, with letters sent across kingdoms, armies mobilized, and marriages reconsidered. Life at court was a series of constant, subtle disasters where everyone performed with impeccable politeness, while quietly panicking inside. Even ceremonial events weren't safe from scandal. Coronations, tournaments, and feasts could turn chaotic when someone tripped. spilled wine on the king, or insulted a visiting dignitary. There's a famous account of a joust where the champion accidentally killed a spectator. The king laughed politely, but the family of the victim made sure the court never forgot. Etiquette demanded calm, but emotions ran high, and a minor mishap could linger in the collective memory of the nobility for decades. Religion also fueled scandals. Nobles frequently clashed with the church over land, taxes, and influence. Popes would excommunicate kings, bishops would secretly ally with rebels, and saints' relics were occasionally stolen for political advantage. The courts had to navigate these religious intrigues delicately, because offending the church could mean losing legitimacy, troops, or even life itself. And yet, scandals often arose from the smallest incidents: a poorly worded sermon, a stolen chalice, or an overly zealous priest. The medieval court was a powder keg, ready to ignite at any moment. Children at court were not exempt. Heirs could be involved in scandals simply by being born at the wrong time, marrying the wrong person, or displaying the wrong behavior in public. Young princes might be caught in duels over trivial insults, while princesses were sometimes exiled for suspected impropriety. The tiniest misstep was magnified because their status meant everyone was watching. Their lives were both privileged and perilously public, a balance that modern kids can barely comprehend. Even the most minor courtiers played roles in scandals. A servant accidentally overhearing a conversation, a chamberlain misplacing a letter, or a scribe miscopying a decree could trigger weeks of tension, whispered accusations, and subtle revenge. Everyone had a reputation to maintain, and the slightest error could ruin it. Court life was a constant performance of poise, with a subtle undercurrent of panic, fear, and intrigue running through every banquet hall, garden, and bedchamber. And yet, despite all this chaos, the courts were centers of culture, art, and influence. Artists, musicians, and writers thrived under noble patronage. The scandals themselves sometimes inspired poetry, plays, and music. The absurdity, danger, and drama of court life created a rhythm that was chaotic but strangely mesmerizing. Watching from a safe distance, we can admire the elegance, laugh at the minor disasters, and marvel at the resilience of those living in a world where every day was a performance and every gesture could become history. So tonight, imagine yourself slipping quietly through a medieval court, invisible, observing the whispers, the tiny crises, the extravagant displays, and the human errors that shaped kingdoms. You wouldn't survive there, not for a day, but you can float alongside the chaos safely, feeling the gentle pulse of scandal, intrigue, and absurdity fade slowly into the night. Hey guys, welcome back. So far, we've floated past peasants, kings, queens, royal children, and court scandals. Tonight, we're drifting into a world that's equal parts horrifying and fascinating: medieval medicine. And when I say medicine, I don't mean modern hospitals, clean syringes, or miracle drugs. I mean leeches, poultices, magical charms, and the occasional prayer that someone, somewhere, might survive long enough to be remembered. So, get cozy, relax, and let's float gently through the bizarre, often terrifying world of medieval healthcare. First, it's important to understand the mindset. Medieval medicine wasn't about germs or hygiene. That came later. Instead, it was about balancing the humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Too much of one, not enough of another, and suddenly you were sick. Doctors believed that cutting you, draining you, or otherwise tinkering with your fluids could fix everything. If you had a fever, a headache, or a cough, chances are someone would suggest bloodletting, and they weren't shy about it. Veins were opened, leeches applied, and the patient often felt worse because removing half your blood generally has that effect. If you survive the bloodletting, congratulations. Next, there were herbal remedies. Herbs were magical, sacred, or simply confusing. Mint, sage, rosemary, thyme used for everything from coughs to melancholy to preventing bad luck. Some herbs actually worked, mostly because they contained antiseptic compounds. But most were just sprinkled on wounds or brewed into unpleasant teas. Doctors often combined herbs with prayers or charms. A pinch of rosemary might save you spiritually, even if it didn't save your leg. Surgery existed, but it was not exactly gentle. Without anesthesia, patients had to endure procedures while being held down by assistants or family members. If you needed a tooth pulled, a tumor removed, or a bone reset, you had to bite down on leather, pray, and hope the surgeon wasn't having a bad day. Infection control was non-existent. The same tools might be used on multiple patients, which makes modern dental offices feel like utopia. Amputations happened quickly, often as a last resort, and sometimes simply because someone thought it looked infected. The patient's screams were background music to the doctor's confident humming. Then there were the more creative treatments, the ones that make historians shake their heads. People would wear charms, amulets, or magical symbols. Leeching, cupping, and even applying animal parts to wounds were common. Eye diseases might be treated with pigeon droppings. Fever might be cured with a mixture of crushed gems or urine. Yes, urine. It was believed to have healing properties because, naturally, if you're desperate, why not try everything? Some remedies were symbolic, some were practical, and some were outright dangerous, but they all had one thing in common. They offered hope. Even if it was faint hope with a side of infection. Plagues, of course, were the ultimate test of medieval medicine. Bubonic plague, smallpox, typhoid swept through towns, villages, and courts with devastating efficiency. Doctors were powerless, nobles fled, and commoners were left to fend for themselves. Treatments included bloodletting, burning aromatic herbs, isolating the sick, sometimes just shoving them into a room and calling for divine intervention. Masks, as we imagine them now, existed in a form with beaks filled with aromatic herbs designed to filter disease. They didn't, but at least they looked dramatic, which was important for morale. Royal courts had their own brand of medicine, often slightly more elaborate but equally strange. Kings and queens had personal physicians who would bleed, brew potions, and recite prayers with equal intensity. They might recommend long baths, exercise, or particular diets. Spices were considered medicinal, so a feast could double as a treatment plan. Hospitals existed, but they were rudimentary. Wealthy patients got better food, clean linens, and attentive care if you survived the treatment itself. Commoners, on the other hand, were mostly left to folk remedies, charms, and the occasional herbalist wandering the village. Childbirth was particularly terrifying. Even in royal families, giving birth was a life-threatening ordeal. Midwives, herbalists, and family members gathered around, chanting prayers, applying poultices, and hoping the infant and mother survived. Caesarean sections existed but were usually fatal for the mother. Children born into royalty often inherited the family's fragile constitution, and many didn't survive their first year. Survivors carried with them the subtle consequences of weak nutrition, illness, and overprotective parenting. Mental health wasn't understood either. Melancholy, hysteria, or madness could be treated with bleeding, confinement, charms, or exorcism. Kings believed they were made of glass, queens were thought bewitched, and children were occasionally locked in rooms if their behavior was inconvenient. There was little distinction between psychology and superstition. Being sane in the Middle Ages was partially skill, partially luck, and partially knowing which doctor to avoid. Despite all these challenges, some people survived. Some thrived. Medieval medicine was imperfect, often bizarre, and occasionally cruel, but it kept enough people alive to build cathedrals, fight wars, and pass their genes down the line. It was a world of small victories, gentle horrors, and strange ingenuity. People did the best they could with the knowledge they had, fumbling through life with leeches, charms, and prayers as their guides. So tonight, as you drift further into sleep, imagine a medieval physician quietly moving through a candlelit room, tending to a patient with a poultice in one hand and a prayer in the other. You wouldn't survive a day in this world, not without screaming, fainting, or being bled a little too much but from a safe, modern distance. It's strangely mesmerizing. The hum of a world where hope, fear, and curiosity were tangled together, fading slowly into the quiet night. Hey guys, welcome back. You've drifted through royal disasters, tragic children, scandalous courts, and bizarre medical practices. Tonight, we're floating lower, all the way down to the ground, medieval peasants. And when I say peasants, I mean people whose daily lives were mud, hard work, and just enough bread to survive. No crowns, no silk, no mistresses, no charming intrigues to grind. So get comfortable, close your eyes, and let's drift gently into the slow, exhausting world of the medieval common folk. Life as a peasant started early. Children weren't allowed to play for long. Work began almost as soon as they could walk. Boys learned farming, herding, and tool use, while girls learned cooking, weaving, and managing small livestock. Playtime existed in brief, muddy bursts, chasing chickens, or rolling in hay. But it was always shadowed by the reality that failure could mean hunger or punishment. Mistakes weren't funny. They were expensive. A dropped basket of grain or a broken plow could ruin a week's work and invite scolding. Peasants lived in simple homes, often made of wood, wattle, and daub. Thatched roofs leaked, floors were dirt, and smoke from cooking fires filled the tiny rooms. Cleanliness was a relative concept. Baths were rare, water scarce, and everyone smelled faintly of livestock, sweat, and smoke. Rats, lice, and fleas were constant companions. Life expectancy was short, disease was common, and comfort was mostly a dream. If you survived childhood, you were considered lucky, and that luck carried into adulthood like a fragile, fruit's miserable shield. Food was simple but repetitive. Bread, porridge, and vegetables dominated meals. Meat was occasional, usually reserved for feast days or hunting privileges. Preservation was tricky. Salted or smoked meat lasted longer, but freshness was rare. Hunger was normal, and famine could strike with little warning. People ate what they could grow, store, or barter for. Spices were rare and expensive, mostly for the wealthy, so flavor was modest. Meals were utilitarian, meant to sustain labor, not delight the palate. Work was constant and grueling. From sunrise to sunset, peasants plowed fields, tended animals, mended fences, and harvested crops. Seasons dictated the rhythm of life. Spring was for planting, summer for tending, autumn for harvest, and winter for repair and survival. The land itself controlled your fate. Bad weather could ruin crops, and with it, the entire year's food and income. There were taxes, tithes, and rents owed to lords, meaning you worked not only for yourself, but also for someone else's comfort and wealth. Religion played a significant role in peasant life. Church was not just spiritual, it was social, legal, and occasionally entertaining. Holidays and saints' days broke up the monotony, offering brief respite with feasts, games, and communal gatherings. But even then, labor was never fully suspended, and guilt for not working remained a subtle, constant pressure. The church dictated moral behavior, approved punishments, and occasionally provided guidance or rudimentary care. Prayers were thought to influence harvests, health, and fortune, and superstition mingled freely with faith. Children's lives mirrored their parents. From a young age, boys helped with plowing, herding, or carpentry, while girls tended gardens, cooked, spun, and fetched water. Education was minimal. Literacy was rare. Skills were learned by observation and repetition. Mistakes could be costly, but survival depended on adaptation, patience, and endurance. Leisure was fleeting. A game with neighbors, a story told around the fire, or simple daydreaming in the fields. Illness and injury were ever-present threats. Without access to physicians or reliable remedies, a broken limb, infection, or fever could be fatal. Folk remedies, herbs, and superstitions were the only protection for most peasants. Simple wounds could fester. Seasonal sicknesses could sweep through a village like wildfire. Mortality rates were high, and surviving to adulthood was itself an achievement. Families grew strong, resilient, and cautious, wary of each winter, storm, or stray animal that could threaten their livelihood. Peasant communities were tightly knit. Cooperation was essential for survival. Harvesting required coordination, animals were shared or bartered, and houses often clustered for safety. Social hierarchy existed, but the dynamics were practical rather than political intrigue. The lord or lady may have set rules and collected taxes, but daily life depended on neighbors helping neighbors, sharing resources, and quietly managing disputes. Villages were microcosms of survival, cooperation, and quiet endurance. Entertainment was minimal but meaningful. Storytelling, music, and dance offered brief escape from monotony. Festivals and church holidays punctuated the year, providing moments of joy, indulgence, and camaraderie. Life was hard, but humans are adaptable. Peasants found ways to celebrate small victories, savor the rare feast, and laugh quietly at their misfortunes. Humor, when it existed, was dry, practical, and shared among people who understood suffering firsthand. Even death had its place in daily life. Infant mortality, disease, and accidents were frequent, so funerals were practical as well as spiritual. Families buried loved ones close by, often with simple markers. Life was fragile, short, and relentless, yet people carried on, cultivating the land, raising children, and preserving community through generations. Their persistence formed the backbone of medieval society. Even as kings, queens, and courtiers lived in drama, wealth, and absurdity. So tonight, as you drift further into sleep, imagine a peasant village at dusk. Smoke curls from tiny chimneys, animals settle in pens, and families gather for their simple meal. The day's work is done, the fields lie quiet, and the rhythm of survival hums softly. You wouldn't survive a day here either, not without exhaustion, hunger, and mud under your nails, but from the comfort of your modern world. You can drift alongside them, feeling the pulse of human endurance, fading slowly into the gentle night. Hey guys, welcome back. You've drifted past royal chaos, tragic children, court scandals, medieval medicine, and the daily grind of peasants. Tonight, we're floating into the twilight of the medieval era, time when kingdoms fell. Borders shifted, and the world slowly started to change. And when I say change, I don't mean smartphones or instant coffee. I mean slow, unsettling, fascinating shifts that shaped Europe and beyond. So get cozy, settle in, and let's drift gently into a world in transition. By the late Middle Ages, many kingdoms were exhausted. Wars had drained resources, populations had been decimated by plague, and peasant revolts were becoming more common. England, France, Italy, and the Holy Roman Empire faced internal instability as lords and monarchs struggled to maintain control. The 100 Years' War had left scars, villages burned, trade disrupted, and the nobility financially strained. Even kings who survived politically were often financially crippled, and their courts were quieter than usual, echoing with empty halls and whispered complaints. Disease remained a constant companion. The Black Death, recurring in waves, had wiped out a third of Europe's population by some estimates. Survivors faced labor shortages, food scarcity, and the psychological trauma of losing neighbors, siblings, and sometimes entire families. With fewer hands to till the land, wages slowly improved for peasants. giving them a tiny advantage after centuries of servitude. Yet, instability persisted, and the delicate balance of medieval society teetered on the edge of chaos. Monarchs were forced to adapt or perish. Some consolidated power, centralizing authority to maintain control. Others clung to tradition and fell behind. The feudal system, which had structured life for centuries, began to weaken. Lords were less able to enforce absolute control over peasants. Towns grew wealthier and more independent, and trade networks slowly expanded. Medieval Europe was slowly becoming more connected, more complex, and less predictable. Courts still had drama, of course, but the stakes were shifting. Nobles schemed, but the rise of centralized monarchies meant kings increasingly had the final say. Diplomatic marriages were still important, but dynastic chaos began to be supplemented with treaties, trade agreements, and bureaucracies. Letters became a powerful tool, and ambassadors traveled across borders, carrying messages that could prevent or provoke wars. The world was moving from the raw chaos of the earlier medieval period towards something more organized. Though not necessarily less cruel, technology and ideas also crept in. Gunpowder, cannons, and more efficient fortifications changed warfare. Castles were no longer invincible, and knights on horseback were beginning to face new threats. Printing presses started to appear, spreading knowledge faster than scribes ever could. Education began slowly expanding beyond the elite. Universities grew, and literacy spread. Even religion was under pressure, as scholars questioned traditions, laying the groundwork for future upheaval. Change was subtle but relentless. Like water slowly carving a canyon over centuries, peasants and townsfolk felt these shifts too. Markets grew larger, trade routes expanded, and towns became centers of commerce and culture. People who once labored entirely for survival could now sell goods, learn trades, and participate in the slow transformation of society. Famine remained a threat, but opportunity small, incremental, and fragile emerged. Life was still hard, but the rigid structures of medieval hierarchy began to flex ever so slightly. And yet, despite all this change, many aspects of medieval life remained. Disease persisted, superstition thrived, courts remained dramatic, and children still faced incredible pressure. Daily life was a mix of tradition and innovation, survival and subtle progress. The past was not disappearing overnight, was morphing, bending, and occasionally colliding with the future. Kings fell, peasants survived, scholars debated, and the world inched forward as the medieval era drew to a close. The stage was set for the Renaissance, for exploration, for new ways of thinking, and for art, literature, and science to flourish. But for now, in this twilight, imagine quiet castles, smoke curling from peasant huts, markets bustling softly, and courts whispering endlessly. The world was changing, slowly, with the rhythm of human ambition, fear, and endurance echoing across centuries. So tonight, as you drift further into sleep, picture the medieval world fading like a soft, distant memory. Kingdoms fall, peasants labor, children grow, and courts whisper. You wouldn't survive a day in this era but from the safety of your modern bed. You can float alongside history, watching the old world slowly give way to the new, one quiet moment at a time. Hey guys, welcome back. So far, we've drifted through royal chaos, tragic children, court scandals, bizarre medicine, peasant life, and the twilight of kingdoms. Tonight, we're floating into the quieter, more subtle side of medieval life, culture. And when I say culture, I don't mean Instagram-worthy art or viral videos. I mean music, art, rituals, and traditions that shaped everyday life, giving people moments of beauty, rhythm, and meaning in a world otherwise dominated by work, survival, and chaos. So get comfortable, snuggle in, and let's drift gently through the human creativity of the Middle Ages. Music was everywhere. even if it wasn't loud or polished by modern standards. In the courts, minstrels performed songs about kings, battles, love, and legendary heroes. Nobles listened politely, clapped at the right moments, and occasionally hummed along. The music was often simple, repetitive, and soothing, perfect for evenings after long days of intrigue or warfare. In villages, peasants sang while they worked, their voices blending with the rhythm of labor, plowing, harvesting, or tending animals. Songs were functional as much as entertaining, marking time, celebrating seasons, or telling stories that might otherwise be forgotten. Art was both decorative and functional. Cathedrals rose skyward, carved with figures of saints, animals, occasionally grotesque faces meant to remind viewers of sin or mortality. Illuminated manuscripts, painstakingly hand-painted, captured stories, prayers, and knowledge in vibrant colors. Tapestries adorned walls, depicting hunts, battles, or allegories of virtue and vice. These creations were expensive, time-consuming, and often commissioned by royalty or the church. For the average peasant, a painted manuscript was as unattainable as a private jet, but its existence shaped the world, offering inspiration, moral guidance, and beauty in a harsh environment. Rituals and festivals punctuated the year. Religious holidays, saints' days, and seasonal celebrations were opportunities for communities to gather, rest, and enjoy a rare sense of continuity. Processions, dances, and feasts allowed people to step out of daily labor, indulge in music and food, and reaffirm social bonds. Even in courts, rituals governed behavior, coronations, tournaments, and religious ceremonies maintained order, displayed power, and allowed the elite to remind everyone of their status. Rituals gave structure, purpose, and rhythm to lives that could otherwise feel chaotic. Craftsmanship was highly valued. Blacksmiths forged tools, weapons, and armor. Carpenters built houses, furniture, and siege engines. Weavers, potters, and masons created items that were both functional and beautiful. Every object was touched by human skill, and every piece reflected tradition, practicality, and ingenuity. Even a simple clay pot or a carved wooden chair carried the imprint of someone's hands. Hours of labor and a connection to history. Clothing also reflected culture. Nobles wore silks, furs, and elaborate embroidery, signaling wealth, status, and allegiance. Colors mattered, patterns mattered, and each garment could send subtle messages about family, loyalty, or fashion sense. Commoners wore practical clothing made from wool, linen, or coarse fabrics. But even here, subtle patterns, colors, and accessories communicated identity and social belonging. Fashion, like music and art, was a language, speaking without words. Shaping perceptions and interactions, education and storytelling were central to culture. Scholars in monasteries copied texts, preserved knowledge, and debated ideas. Storytellers traveled between villages, courts, and towns, carrying tales that blended history, myth, and moral lessons. Legends of knights, saints, and heroes inspired courage, warned of folly, and entertained simultaneously. Even children absorbed these stories, internalizing the culture, humor, and wisdom of their world before they could read or write. Religion infused nearly everything. Church rituals structured time, morality, and communal life. Bells marked hours, sermons instructed behavior, and saints' relics inspired devotion. Spiritual art, music, and storytelling intertwined with daily life, offering guidance, comfort, and explanation for the inexplicable. Even peasants, whose lives were dominated by labor, found moments of beauty and contemplation in religious expression, whether through song, ritual, or the occasional marvel at a decorated church window. Even conflict inspired culture. Chronicles, poetry, and music captured battles, heroic deeds, and tragic losses. Artists portrayed wars, victories, and defeats, preserving memory and shaping collective identity. Humor existed too. Satirical plays, Humorous tales and exaggerated stories provided relief from monotony and fear. Medieval culture balanced beauty, order, and occasional absurdity, reflecting the human desire for expression amid hardship. Hey guys, welcome back. You've floated through royal chaos, tragic children, court scandals, medieval medicine, peasant life, the twilight of kingdoms, and the culture that filled their days. Tonight, we're drifting into the final stretch, exploring the legacy of the Middle Ages and how its people, ideas, and habits still echo in our modern world. So get cozy, pull your blankets up, and let's gently wander through the faint, lasting traces of a world that feels distant yet oddly familiar. One of the clearest legacies is governance. Many modern nations trace their political systems, borders, and laws back to medieval roots. England, France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire each developed complex structures of monarchy, nobility, and administration that informed later government. Courts and parliaments, tax systems, and legal traditions all began forming in those centuries. Even if we think of today as sleek, modern, and efficient, some aspects like bureaucratic paperwork, complicated inheritance rules, and ceremonial formalities are medieval in origin. You might not need a knight or a king to validate a contract, but the idea of structured authority and hierarchy has deep medieval roots. Architecture and cities also carry the Middle Ages into modernity. Cathedrals, castles, and town layouts influenced design, engineering, and urban planning for centuries. Gothic arches, fortifications, and even town squares inspired later architects. Streets and markets in some European cities follow the exact patterns laid centuries ago. You walk through some towns today and are literally stepping where peasants, merchants, and royalty once walked, carrying baskets of food, messages, or secrets. History isn't just written in books, it's etched into the stones beneath our feet. Language, literature, and education reflect medieval legacies too. Many words, idioms, and narrative styles originate in medieval Europe. Epic poetry, chivalric romance, religious texts, and historical chronicles shaped literature for centuries. Universities founded in the medieval Oxford, Bologna, Paris remain influential today. Scholarly traditions, debate, and the pursuit of knowledge have medieval fingerprints all over them. Even storytelling in books, movies, and games often relies on medieval tropes: knights, castles, quests, feasts, and courtly intrigue. We're still captivated by the drama, strategy, and hierarchy that defined that time. Culture and art echo as well. Music, visual arts, and theatrical traditions born in the Middle Ages influenced Renaissance and modern culture. Tapestries, manuscripts, and religious iconography inspired later artists and designers. Folktales, myths, and legends circulated orally for centuries before being preserved in writing, influencing literature, film, and popular imagination. Even modern holidays, Christmas, Easter, harvest festivals retain elements of medieval ritual, symbolism, and social practice. The rhythms of medieval life subtly pulse beneath the surface of our cultural experience. Medicine, oddly enough, left both good and bad legacies. Many herbal remedies persisted for centuries, some eventually informing modern pharmacology. Public health practices evolved slowly, influenced by the trials, errors, and disasters of medieval epidemics. Hospitals, though rudimentary, laid the groundwork for organized medical care. Lessons learned from disease, hygiene, and mortality shaped the way societies approached health long after the last leech was applied. We still honor the careful observations even when medieval medicine itself was bizarre, frightening, or wildly inefficient. Economics and trade also carry echoes. Markets, guilds, and currency systems developed during the Middle Ages formed the foundation for modern commerce. Towns, trade routes, and merchant networks connected regions, created wealth, and allowed new ideas to circulate. Banking, credit, and economic regulation evolved gradually. Tracing a line from medieval merchants to modern financial systems, even today, global trade, regional specialization. And urban markets are deeply influenced by centuries of incremental development in medieval Europe. Finally, social structures and human behavior reflect medieval patterns. Class distinctions, gender expectations, and familial hierarchies shape the way societies functioned for centuries. Some aspects persist subtly, influencing etiquette, inheritance, and cultural norms. The Middle Ages remind us that human ambition, fear, ingenuity, and folly are timeless. Royal scandals, peasant labor, and courtly intrigue echo in boardrooms, politics, and social media drama today, though thankfully without swords, plagues, or leeches. So tonight, as you drift further into sleep, imagine a faint, invisible thread connecting past and present. Castles, villages, courts, and fields may be gone or transformed, but the echoes remain in our buildings, words, celebrations, stories, and even in our understanding of governance and society. You wouldn't survive a day in the medieval world, but its rhythms, struggles, and creativity quietly shape the life you live today. And that's the gentle, subtle magic of history, always present, always influencing, fading slowly into the background as you rest. Hey guys, welcome back. We've wandered through kings and queens, scandals, tragic children, peasants, medicine, culture, and the echoes that shaped the modern world. Tonight, we're drifting slowly, reflecting on the entire medieval era as if we're floating above it, watching life unfold with a quiet, calm perspective. No need to rush, no need to panic, just gentle observation. Perfect for drifting into sleep. The medieval world was chaotic, unpredictable, and often harsh, but it was also strangely rhythmic. Life revolved around seasons, ceremonies, and survival. Peasants woke with the sun, tended fields, cooked meals, and slept under smoky roofs. Royals navigated intrigue, illness, and diplomacy, all while maintaining appearances. Children were trained, educated, or sometimes neglected, depending on class. Every day carried risks, disease, famine, war, or personal mistakes, but also opportunities for laughter, creativity, and quiet resilience. Courts were full of absurdity. Kings obsessed over appearances, mistresses, and alliances. Queens maneuvered, plotted, and sometimes saved entire kingdoms. Advisors whispered, nobles schemed, and scandals unfolded with alarming regularity. Life in a castle could be luxurious, terrifying, or simply monotonous. Every gesture mattered, every word could be remembered for years, and even the smallest misstep could carry consequences far beyond imagination. Yet through it all, people adapted. They learned survival, patience, and subtle cunning, navigating a delicate balance between power, danger, and decorum. Medical practices were both fascinating and alarming. Leeches, poultices, and prayers dominated treatment. Bloodletting was standard, herbs were magical, and infection was often inevitable. Yet these practices laid the groundwork for observation, experimentation, and incremental improvement. Despite mistakes and failures, people sought to heal, to understand, and to survive. Their persistence, curiosity, and ingenuity echo faintly in our modern medicine, even if we've thankfully abandoned most of the more dramatic treatments. Peasant life was steady, relentless, and quietly heroic. Long hours of labor, minimal food, and constant vulnerability shaped communities built on cooperation and resilience. Festivals, storytelling, music, and ritual offered respite from daily toil, while faith, superstition, and shared traditions bound people together. The rhythm of survival created an underlying sense of endurance, a pulse that ran quietly beneath the grandeur of courts and cathedrals. Without peasants, medieval society could not have existed. Their quiet courage often goes unnoticed in the grand narratives of kings and wars. Culture was the subtle heartbeat of the era. Music, art, rituals, and storytelling offered beauty amid struggle. Cathedrals, manuscripts, tapestries, and minstrels preserved human creativity, humor, and hope. Rituals structured life, art inspired awe, and songs carried knowledge from village to village. Even small, seemingly insignificant practices had meaning, reminding us that culture persists quietly, shaping identity, belief, and daily life. The medieval world was both brutal and tender, terrifying and beautiful. And these contrasts are what make it endlessly fascinating to explore. The twilight of the Middle Ages brought transition. Kingdoms weakened, trade expanded, technology advanced, and ideas spread. Change was slow, uneven, and sometimes barely noticeable. But it set the stage for the Renaissance, exploration, and the modern era. Social structures began shifting. Peasants gained small freedoms. Courts adapted to new power dynamics, and education slowly expanded beyond the elite. The world was leaving behind some traditions while cautiously embracing innovation. A delicate dance of continuity and transformation. Even in death, the medieval era left echoes. Buildings, texts, music, rituals, and social patterns persisted. Modern governance, law, urban planning, storytelling, art, and even medicine carry fingerprints of this period. It reminds us that history is not only in the past, it lives in the present, shaping our daily lives, our traditions, and even our imagination. Though we wouldn't survive a day in the medieval world, the influence of its people, ideas, and culture surrounds us, faint and persistent, like the soft pulse of a long-forgotten heartbeat. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine the medieval world stretching out beneath you. Fields, villages, castles, courts, and quiet villages. Hear the soft music of minstrels. Feel the rhythm of peasants' labor. Notice the whispers of court intrigue, and sense the slow, creeping change that eventually shaped the modern world. It was chaotic, harsh, absurd, beautiful, and deeply human, a world that you can observe safely, resting in the comfort of your modern life. Thank you for floating through the medieval world tonight. Remember to like, subscribe, and let these stories carry you gently into dreams. Imagine yourself drifting among the centuries, touching the lives of those who lived, loved, labored, and dreamed before us. Sweet dreams, and may your rest be as slow and gentle as the centuries themselves. Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're drifting even more slowly through the medieval world, lingering over small details, minor stories, and subtle observations. This is the part where we float gently over daily life, personal quirks, and little historical moments perfect for sleep. Nothing dramatic, just calm reflection. So settle in, breathe slowly, and let's continue our journey. Imagine a peasant family waking at dawn. The rooster crows. Smoke drifts from the chimney. A mother kneads dough while her children chase chickens in the yard. Every sound is familiar. The creak of the door, the clatter of pots, the low murmur of a father counting livestock. Life is repetitive, structured, and sometimes exhausting, but in that rhythm, there's a quiet satisfaction. Each day is a small victory. Food is prepared, animals are fed, and survival continues. The medieval world was harsh, yes, but it also had patterns. Comfort in repetition, and subtle, steady beauty. Now drift to a castle in early morning light. The Lord rises reluctantly, robes brushing stone floors. Servants attend quietly, polishing, arranging, and preparing meals. Courtiers whisper as they move through dimly lit halls. A scribe copies a letter by hand, ink drying slowly on vellum. The tension is quiet, almost imperceptible. Every gesture matters, but everything proceeds at a human pace, careful, deliberate, and rhythmically slow. There's drama here, yes, but also ritual, predictability, and the soft background music of daily life. Let's pause at a festival in a village. People gather in the square, drums tapping, pipes whistling. Children running in circles, and the scent of bread and stew drifting from nearby kitchens. Villagers trade goods, share gossip, and enjoy rare moments of leisure. Adults laugh quietly, mindful of the responsibilities waiting once the sun sinks. The festival is simple but meaningful. A pause from survival. A celebration of community. A tiny beacon of joy in an otherwise laborious existence. Imagine standing there, hearing the soft murmur of voices, the clatter of wooden carts, the occasional bleat of a goat history unfolding in its small, human moments. Drifting further, let's observe medieval scholars in candlelit chambers. Monks meticulously copy texts, occasionally pausing to sip water or murmur a prayer. A student in the corner struggles with a difficult passage, brow furrowed, quill scratching across parchment. The air smells faintly of ink and dust. Knowledge is painstakingly preserved, slowly accumulated, and delicately passed forward. The quiet, methodical rhythm of learning contrasts with the chaos outside the walls. Life here is slow, careful. An intentional, a gentle reminder that even in a world dominated by survival and hierarchy, human curiosity persisted. Consider a medieval kitchen at dusk. Fires crackle, smoke curls, and the cook stirs a pot of stew. Ingredients are basic, yet the cook measures, seasons, and tastes with care. Every meal requires thought, skill, and attention. Perhaps herbs are crushed, bread is baked, or a rare treat is added for a festival. This attention to small detail reflects the rhythm of life, practical, necessary, and quietly rewarding. Even in hardship, people sought comfort, nourishment, and occasional indulgence. A quiet anecdote: imagine a young noble learning to ride a horse. The instructor adjusts the saddle, whispers encouragement, and nudges the colt forward. The young rider wobbles, steadies, and finally trots successfully. Small triumphs like this mattered deeply. Skill, discipline, and patience carried both literal and metaphorical weight in the medieval world. Every accomplishment, no matter how minor, contributed to survival, reputation, and eventual influence. Now drift to a medieval marketplace. Merchants display goods, wool, pottery, vegetables, and spices. Townsfolk haggle quietly. Children weave between stalls, and the occasional musician adds background sound. The market is not only commerce, but social rhythm, a place to exchange stories, check on neighbors, and experience fleeting community cohesion. Even in modest surroundings, life finds a gentle pulse, softly persistent, rhythmic, and human, finally reflect on the enduring human presence. Kings, peasants, merchants, and children all face challenges: disease, hunger, hierarchy, and mortality. And yet, amid toil, chaos, and unpredictability, people laughed, celebrated, created, and survived. The Middle Ages were not just a time of darkness or suffering. They were alive with humanity, small gestures, quiet victories, and patterns that echo faintly even today. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine a slow, gentle tour through the medieval world. Fields, villages, castles, workshops, markets, and quiet chambers. Life is repetitive, rhythmic, and sometimes absurd, but it is also deeply human. You wouldn't survive a day in this world but from your bed, surrounded by comfort. You can float above it all, witnessing centuries of lives lived in careful, persistent rhythm. Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're drifting even slower, lingering on little stories and quirks from medieval life. These aren't dramatic battles or sweeping catastrophes, just small, often overlooked moments that help us understand the rhythm of the era. So get comfortable, breathe deeply, and let's float gently through the minor oddities and human details of the Middle Ages. Imagine a royal court, where a king insists on having a golden chamber pot delivered, because, of course, he believes it will improve his digestion. Servants shuffle nervously, trying to balance practicality and obedience, while the court whispers quietly, noting the extravagance. Such quirks were common. Kings obsessed with comfort, hygiene, or superstition in ways that seem absurd today. And yet, these small obsessions defined daily life, influenced servants, and shaped court dynamics. Now, picture a noblewoman meticulously embroidering a tapestry while gossip flows around her. She threads gold and silver threads into complex patterns, sometimes inspired by actual events, sometimes entirely fantastical. Her companions discuss alliances, failed romances, or the most recent feast. The rhythm is slow, deliberate, and oddly soothing, a combination of skill, storytelling, and social bonding. Even small acts like embroidery carried cultural weight. Identity, prestige, and storytelling interwoven into a single quiet moment. Consider a peasant child carefully feeding chickens in the yard. One misstep, and feathers fly, eggs break, or a chicken escapes. Mistakes have consequences, yet children learn patience, observation, and the delicate balance of survival. Every day is practice. Every minor success celebrated quietly. Every error a lesson. Life is hard, yes, but it is rhythmic and full of small, teachable moments. Even food preparation carried quirks. Imagine a cook adding an unusual herb to a stew because a neighbor recommended it for health or luck. The result may be strange, but it's a reminder of medieval creativity and experimentation. People relied on experience, superstition, and trial and error, often blending practicality with belief. Meals became rituals of both nourishment and cultural expression, quiet and deliberate, punctuated by smells, textures, and tastes that remain invisible to us today, but real to them. Let's drift to an artisan's workshop. A blacksmith hammers slowly, sparks flying, creating a tool, a weapon, or a simple ornament. Each strike is careful, each product a combination of skill, patience, and physical labor. Nearby, an apprentice observes quietly, occasionally mimicking the motions. Learning was hands-on, slow, and rhythmic. Mastery required repetition, attention, and endurance. The workshop hums with a subtle energy, human skill in motion, quietly shaping the medieval world. Now imagine a monastery at dusk. Monks move quietly through cloisters, chanting, copying manuscripts, and pausing to meditate. The light is soft, dust motes drift through windows, and the rhythm of prayer, labor, and study creates a gentle cadence. The pace is deliberate, slow, and almost hypnotic. Even amid isolation, these routines preserve knowledge, culture, and memory, offering a calm anchor in a sometimes chaotic world. A gentle anecdote: a lord misplaces his favorite goblet and spends the day searching while his advisors suppress exasperation. The goblet is found under a table, unnoticed for days. But the search itself creates a quiet ripple of attention, subtle social dynamics, and minor stress. Small incidents like this occurred constantly: lost items, misunderstandings, minor disputes, and fleeting triumphs, all threading together into the fabric of everyday medieval life. Picture a market where a merchant sells wool dyed with a rare pigment. Customers haggle quietly, observing texture, color, and quality. Children wander between stalls, animals graze nearby, and the occasional minstrel's tune floats above the activity. Every small transaction contributes to survival, community, and rhythm. Life is repetitive, yes, but also patterned and alive with small, meaningful details. Even superstition finds its place. A villager may carry a tiny charm in their pocket, hoping for protection, or sprinkle herbs in a home to ensure luck. Nothing dramatic happens, no magical fireworks, but the ritual provides comfort, structure, and quiet reassurance. These small practices offer insight into how medieval people sought control, peace, and consistency in an unpredictable world. Finally, let's drift over a quiet countryside at twilight. Smoke curls from cottages. Animals settle in pens. Distant bells toll from a church tower. Life continues at its gentle pace. Work is done. Children are asleep, and small stories, obsessions, and habits echo softly. The medieval world is harsh, quirky, and repetitive, but also strangely human and deeply rhythmic. Observing these moments gently, safely from the present, lets us appreciate both the difficulties and the quiet beauty of everyday life. So tonight, as you drift further into sleep, picture the small, subtle patterns of the medieval world. Servants moving silently, children learning lessons, artisans creating, villagers tending animals, and rituals quietly unfolding. You wouldn't survive a day there, but from the comfort of your bed, you can float above these centuries, feeling their rhythm, quirks, and quiet humanity carrying you softly into dreams. Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're drifting slowly into the quieter, more subtle side of royal life. Forget epic battles, towering disasters, or dramatic betrayals. Instead, we're floating gently through daily habits, quirks, and the minor absurdities of kings, queens, and courtiers. Get comfortable, settle in, and let's observe the soft rhythms of medieval court life. Imagine a king waking to the faint. Sunlight spilling through a heavy curtain. His hair is messy, robes slightly askew. Servants bustle in quietly, adjusting cushions, bringing water, and delivering the morning meal on polished trays. The king insists on arranging the meal in a very particular pattern because, of course, the world must obey his sense of order. A minor inconvenience, a simple win, but it sets the tone for the day. Courtiers quietly comply, learning patience and the subtle art of moving around a sovereign's eccentricities. Now drift to a queen embroidering at her window. Sunlight catching threads of gold and silver. Her ladies-in-waiting whisper softly, sharing gossip about weddings, feasts, and minor scandals. She listens occasionally, offering polite nods, but her focus remains on the slow, meditative task at hand. Embroidery is both practical and symbolic, a demonstration of skill, taste, and cultural knowledge. Even small accomplishments like this subtly shaped her. Reputation and influence. Consider a prince practicing horsemanship in the courtyard. He wobbles, falls off, mutters complaints, and remounts. An instructor hovers nearby, calm and patient. Knowing this is the rhythm of learning. Repetition, minor embarrassment, gradual improvement. Observation, balance, and patience are essential skills for survival and leadership alike. Every misstep is noted, every small success quietly celebrated. This is the slow, repetitive training that defines much of courtly life. Meticulous, rhythmic, and occasionally absurd. Imagine a royal kitchen in mid-afternoon. Chefs stir, chop, and prepare meals for dozens of people. Each dish carefully arranged and seasoned according to tradition, superstition, or whim. Herbs are sprinkled, sauces simmer, and the occasional burnt loaf is discreetly hidden from view. Cooking in a castle is a performance as much as sustenance. The rhythm of chopping, stirring, tasting, and adjusting mirrors the slow tempo of life in the court. Deliberate, patient, and infused with quiet tension. A gentle anecdote: a lord misplaces his favorite glove, causing a mild stir among attendants. The glove is found hours later, tucked behind a curtain. The search itself becomes a minor story circulating through the court, offering a moment of distraction, amusement, and subtle commentary on human behavior. Life in the court, even at its smallest scale, is a mix of hierarchy, routine, and minor absurdities, creating a soft, continuous rhythm. Now drift to a scribe in the royal library. Quills scratch across parchment as letters, chronicles, and official documents are copied. The scribe pauses occasionally, adjusting ink, rubbing smudges, and humming a quiet tune. Knowledge is painstakingly preserved, slowly, with care, and with the awareness that every stroke has consequences. Even minor errors are significant, yet the pace is calm, methodical, and almost hypnotic. Libraries are quiet sanctuaries in a bustling world, places where thought, record, and reflection coexist peacefully. Picture a ceremonial procession. Knights march in polished armor, attendants carry banners, and the king rides slowly at the center. The event is both spectacle and ritual, teaching decorum, hierarchy, and collective rhythm. Even minor details, the way banners flutter, footsteps align, or voices chant matter, creating a measured cadence that the court internalizes. Life in ceremonies is deliberate, slow, and symbolic, reflecting centuries of tradition, protocol, and subtle power dynamics. Finally, imagine a quiet evening in the castle. Candles flicker, shadows move across tapestries, and soft conversations echo through corridors. Servants finish tasks, nobles retire to private chambers, and the kingdom settles into a gentle nocturnal rhythm. Even in luxury, life in the court is structured, repetitive and quietly human, full of minor stories, quirks, and rhythms that define existence. So tonight, as you drift further into sleep, picture the soft, repetitive patterns of medieval court life: robes adjusted, meals prepared, gloves searched for, embroidery stitched, and lessons learned on horseback. You wouldn't survive a day here, not without patience, adaptability, and a fondness for subtle absurdity. But from the comfort of your bed, you can float above these centuries, observing human quirks and quiet rhythms gently carried toward dreams. Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're drifting slowly into the quieter side of medieval life: rituals, festivals, and the gentle rhythm of village life. Nothing dramatic, nothing terrifying, just the soft, patterned heartbeat of a world moving steadily through seasons, ceremonies, and daily labor. So settle in, breathe slowly, and let's float through these small yet vivid moments. Imagine a village at dawn. Smoke curls from chimneys, roosters crow, and children chase chickens while parents prepare breakfast. The rhythm of life is simple: wake, feed animals, tend crops, prepare food, and check tools. Every task repeats, subtly reinforcing survival and community. There's nothing glamorous, but there's a quiet satisfaction in steady work. And small successes: a well-fed family, a healthy animal, a repaired roof carry profound meaning. Now drift to a seasonal festival. Perhaps it's harvest time. Villagers gather in the square, music floating through the air, drums tapping, and the occasional pipe whistling softly. People wear their best clothes, often patched, sometimes mismatched, but brightened with joy and effort. Children run in circles, laughter blending with conversation. Tradesmen sell goods, neighbors exchange news. And the rhythm of celebration contrasts gently with the monotony of everyday labor. Festivals are brief pauses, small breathing spaces in a life otherwise dominated by work, survival, and social expectation. Consider rituals, both religious and communal. Villagers carry small charms for protection, sprinkle herbs for luck, and perform actions meant to ensure a good harvest or a healthy family. Church bells mark hours, prayers punctuate the day, and holy days interrupt labor with quiet reflection. These rituals are subtle, comforting, and repetitive. They give structure, provide reassurance, and quietly shape behavior, even if their effects are invisible or symbolic. Picture a quiet market day. Merchants display wool, pottery, vegetables, and rare spices. Customers haggle softly, observing quality and texture. Children weave between stalls, sometimes chasing animals or mimicking their parents. Life in the market is rhythmic and social, offering both practical and communal connection. Every small transaction carries weight: food, income, and the subtle reinforcement of community norms. Markets hum softly, a gentle undercurrent in the daily life of a village. Now imagine evening settling over the village. Fires flicker in cottages, smoke drifts lazily into the sky, and animals settle into pens. People finish tasks, wash faces, prepare for night, and share small stories before bed. Conversations are quiet, laughter subdued, and rituals simple. A prayer, a blessing, or a final check on the animals, even in routine. There's a gentle rhythm, a human pulse carried through repetition and habit. A small anecdote: during a village wedding, the groom forgets a ceremonial token. Minor panic ensues. Whispers ripple through the gathering, and the token is found under a bench. Everyone chuckles quietly. Life resumes, and the wedding continues with soft music, dancing, and shared food. These little mishaps and recoveries define social life, offering amusement, relief, and gentle human connection. Picture winter festivals. Fires crackle. People huddle in cottages, and neighbors exchange simple gifts or baked goods. Music is sparse, often a flute or drum, but the rhythm is soothing. Villagers tell stories. Children fall asleep near the fire, and elders reminisce quietly about past winters. Even amidst scarcity, ritual, warmth, and human presence provide comfort. A gentle reminder of continuity, community, and shared experience. Now drift to a quiet chapel. Monks move silently through cloisters, chanting, praying, and attending to manuscripts. The rhythm is slow, deliberate, and comforting. Villagers may pass through for blessings, lighting candles, or quiet reflection. Even small acts, a whispered prayer, a lit candle, a bowed head carry symbolic weight, reinforcing the soft patterns of daily and seasonal life. Finally, picture the village at night. Smoke drifts from chimneys, animals sleep, and the sky darkens gradually. Life pauses, but rhythms continue invisibly. The subtle creak of doors, the soft breathing of inhabitants, the distant toll of a church bell. Festivals, rituals, and routines fade, leaving quiet, gentle human presence. The medieval world is harsh and unpredictable in many ways, but it is also patterned, rhythmic, and deeply human. Observing these moments from your modern bed, you can float safely above them, absorbing their gentle pulse. Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're drifting slowly through the quieter corridors of castles and royal households, lingering over small, human moments, minor quirks, gentle absurdities, and the repetitive rhythms that shaped life behind stone walls. So settle in, breathe deeply, and let's float quietly through the subtle patterns of medieval court life. Imagine a king waking reluctantly, grumbling as servants bring him water and adjust his bedding. He insists on a specific pillow arrangement because why not dictate comfort down 2 millimeters? Servants comply silently, moving through corridors like shadows, balancing obedience with subtle exasperation. The minor obsessions of royalty ripple through the household, influencing mood, schedules, and the quiet choreography of daily life. Now drift to the Queen's chamber. She's embroidering again, focusing on intricate patterns while ladies-in-waiting murmur softly about minor scandals, mismatched marriages, or the latest gossip from a neighboring court. Her work is meticulous, her attention unwavering. Embroidery is not only artistic, but a subtle language. Patterns, threads, and symbols communicate taste, status, and intelligence. Even small accomplishments like this quietly shape reputation and influence. Picture a prince practicing swordsmanship. He fumbles, swings too wide, and stumbles. The instructor sighs gently, adjusting stance and grip. Every misstep becomes a teaching moment, every small success celebrated quietly. Repetition, patience, and subtle correction define the rhythm of training. Courtly life, even in these minor moments, is a constant negotiation of skill, social expectation, and personal ambition. A gentle anecdote: a lord misplaces a favorite goblet during dinner. Panic is mild, but noticeable. Attendants shuffle, searching, murmuring explanations. Hours later, the goblet is discovered behind a tapestry. Life at court is full of these minor dramas, small mistakes, temporary chaos, and quietly resolved crises. They may seem trivial, but they shape the mood, relationships, and rhythm of daily life in a castle. Imagine the castle kitchen. Chefs stir, chop, and season meals with deliberate care. Herbs are added according to tradition or superstition. Bread rises slowly, stews simmer quietly, and sauces are adjusted with soft attention. The kitchen hums with rhythm, repetitive, practical, and surprisingly comforting. Even the occasional burnt loaf or spilled pot does not disrupt the underlying cadence of preparation and care now drift to a scribe in the royal library. Quills scratch across parchment, copying letters, chronicles, or poetry. Light drifts through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that float slowly in the air. The scribe pauses occasionally, dips the quill in ink, rubs a smudge, and continues. Knowledge is preserved deliberately and methodically. The slow rhythm of writing mirrors the quiet pulse of life in the castle. Careful, repetitive, and deeply human. Consider ceremonial processions. Knights march slowly, banners flutter, and courtiers follow in measured steps. Even minor details, the alignment of feet, the tilt of a lance, the flutter of a veil carry symbolic meaning. Ceremonies teach rhythm, hierarchy, and subtle power dynamics. Life at court is structured around repetition, ritual, and minor displays of order. Picture evening descending on the castle. Candles flicker, shadows stretch across walls, and soft conversations echo in corridors. Servants finish chores, nobles retire, and the castle breathes quietly. Even amid luxury, life is structured, rhythmic, and full of minor incidents, quirkiness, and subtle absurdity. Observing it gently, you notice how repetition, attention to detail, and human quirks define daily life more than dramatic events ever could. Finally, imagine the castle at night. Corridors are silent. Animals settle in stables. Fires flicker softly. Minor dramas have passed, small victories achieved, and the quiet rhythm of life continues under stone walls. The medieval world is harsh, yes, but it is also deeply human, patterned, and repetitive gentle pulse, visible if you watch slowly and safely from a modern distance. Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're floating gently into the softer side of court life, the minor scandals, ceremonial missteps, and small dramas that rarely make it into history textbooks, but quietly shaped life in castles and palaces. Nothing too dramatic, just slow, human stories that let us observe the rhythm of medieval nobility. Imagine a minor wedding in the royal court. The bride's gown is slightly off color. The groom's shoes squeak on the polished floors, and a servant trips carrying a platter of wine. Everyone notices, whispers circulate, but the ceremony continues with deliberate calm. Mistakes are small but socially meaningful. Reputation mattered, decorum mattered, and even minor mishaps were absorbed into the soft rhythm of courtly life. Now drift to a court banquet. A jester tries a clever trick, slipping on a patch of spilled wine, earning a mix of laughter and groans. Courtiers murmur quietly, trying to remain dignified, while nobles whisper gossip about a recent scandal involving a distant cousin. Minor incidents ripple through social networks, subtly influencing alliances, friendships, and the quiet hierarchies that structure daily life. Picture a king who insists on having a specific chair in a specific room for dining. Why? No reason really, except habit and whimsy. Servants rearrange tables and chairs quietly, adjusting to the king's insistence, while courtiers mutter softly to themselves. It's mundane, repetitive, and yet essential. Royal preferences dictated the rhythm of the household. A gentle pulse that guided every day. A gentle anecdote, a noble accidentally spills ink on an important document. Panic is minimal, but attention intensifies for a few moments while the scribe quietly remedies the situation. Life at court is full of these small dramas, tiny disruptions, minor stress, and then the calm resumption of daily routines. The pattern is repetition, observation, and quiet correction, Now drift to ceremonial preparations. Knights polish armor, banners are unfolded, and musicians tune instruments. Someone forgets a flag, another misplaces a drumstick, and courtiers quietly adapt. The procession continues regardless, a carefully choreographed rhythm of minor adjustments and human imperfections. These small incidents are soothing if observed from a distance. Life moves on. Problems are small, and the rhythm persists. Picture a queen who prefers a very specific type of tea. The steward searches high and low, consulting traders and traveling merchants. Days later, the tea arrives, and the court hums quietly with relief. Royal whims may seem absurd, but they subtly structured life in the castle, offering lessons in patience, adaptability. An observation, a minor scandal, a young page is caught. Eavesdropping on a whispered conversation between a noble and an advisor. Punishment is gentle a warning, a bit of teasing, but the ripple of awareness affects social behavior subtly. Courtiers learn decorum, timing, and discretion. Even minor incidents shape relationships, routines, and the rhythm of castle life. Imagine a quiet evening after a ceremony. Candles flicker, servants finish tasks, nobles retire, and the castle breathes softly. Discussions continue in hushed tones. Mistakes are quietly rectified. And the pulse of daily life maintains its slow, measured rhythm. Small scandals, ceremonial mishaps, and minor human quirks fade into memory, leaving gentle patterns behind. Finally, picture the castle at night. Shadows stretch, animals rest, and the echoes of minor dramas dissolve into quiet. The medieval world, harsh and unpredictable in many ways, also thrives on small, repeated gestures, tiny adjustments, and subtle rituals. Observing these moments from a safe, modern distance, you can float above them, absorbing the rhythm, humor, and humanity of life in a royal household. Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're drifting slowly into the quieter world beyond castle's village life. Peasant routines, markets, and seasonal celebrations. No dramatic battles, no towering disasters, just the steady, patterned rhythm of everyday life that shaped medieval society. So get comfortable, settle in, and let's float gently through the soft pulse of a rural existence. Imagine a village at dawn. Smoke curls from chimneys, roosters crow, and children chase chickens across uneven cobblestones. Mothers knead dough for bread, fathers check livestock, and everyone moves with quiet purpose. Life is repetitive, rhythmic, and necessary. Every day carries small victories: a cow milked, a roof repaired, vegetables harvested. Though harsh, these routines are comforting in their predictability. The pulse of peasant life is steady, subtle, and human. Now drift to the market. Merchants set up stalls, displaying wool, pottery, vegetables, and occasionally imported spices. Customers haggle quietly, measuring quality, observing texture, and exchanging news. Children weave between stalls, playing, helping, or mimicking adults. The market is more than trade. It is a gentle social hub. Patterns emerge. The same sellers, familiar faces, familiar goods. Life hums quietly, a rhythm reinforced through repetition, observation, and participation. Consider seasonal festivals. During harvest time, villagers gather in the square. Music drifts through the air drums, flutes, and the occasional string instrument. People wear patched but festive clothing. Children chase one another, and neighbors share baked goods. Festivals mark pauses in labor, brief celebrations, and subtle moments of joy. Though small and humble, they provide rhythm, comfort, and shared identity. Life is repetitive, but these moments offer gentle relief. A gentle anecdote during a midsummer celebration. Someone drops a basket of berries. Laughter follows. Someone helps gather the fruit, and the festival continues with barely a ripple. These minor disruptions are absorbed naturally, creating patterns of learning, adaptation, and subtle amusement. Life, even in its simplicity, has small surprises that are quietly integrated into daily rhythm. Now drift to daily chores. Women carry water from wells, men tend animals, and children sweep yards or chase poultry. Smoke drifts from cooking fires, bread rises slowly, and stew simmers in clay pots. Tasks repeat daily, weekly, seasonally, but each repetition reinforces knowledge, endurance, and skill. Life is both labor and ritual, mundane yet meaningful. Even monotony carries a subtle, hypnotic pattern. Consider rural superstition. Villagers sprinkle herbs to ward off illness, hang charms near doors, and whisper blessings before planting crops. Nothing dramatic occurs, but these acts provide structure, reassurance, and a rhythm of life. Small, repetitive gestures of hope quietly reinforce daily routines and human resilience. Picture a quiet evening in the village. Smoke drifts lazily from chimneys. Animals settle in pens, and villagers gather around fires, sharing stories, songs, and simple laughter. Conversations are soft, movements measured, and the pulse of life continues calmly. Even in scarcity, joy and comfort exist in subtle patterns, shared tasks, repeated rituals, and minor celebrations. Finally, imagine winter in a rural village. Fires burn low, animals huddle together, and the rhythm of life slows. People tell stories, children fall asleep by warm hearths, and neighbors exchange small gifts or baked goods. The seasons provide structure, the festivals punctuate time, and the rhythm of labor, rest. And community continues quietly. The medieval world may seem harsh, but it pulses gently with repetition, habit, and human connection. Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're drifting slowly into the quieter, stranger side of medieval life, medicine, superstition, and the subtle routines of care. Nothing dramatic, no gory scenes, just the soft, repetitive rhythm of how people sought health, healing, and comfort in a world that didn't always understand disease. So settle in, breathe slowly, and let's float gently through these quiet, curious moments. Imagine a small village doctor or, perhaps a wise woman, preparing a remedy. Herbs are crushed in a mortar, mixed with water or wine, and carefully administered to a patient. Sometimes the cure works, sometimes it doesn't, but the process is deliberate, careful, and ritualistic. Medicine in the medieval world is as much about rhythm, habit, and belief as it is about biology. Every action, the grinding, the boiling, the sprinkling carries subtle comfort for the patient. Now drift to superstition. A villager sprinkles salt in corners of the home to ward off illness. A mother ties a small charm around her child's neck, quietly whispering a blessing. No dramatic magic occurs, but the rituals provide reassurance, structure, a sense of control in an unpredictable world. Life is harsh, yes, but these small, repeated actions create gentle patterns, offering rhythm and calm. Consider hospitals of the time, often small, quiet, and surprisingly organized. Patients lie on simple beds, attendants move slowly through halls, and healers follow routines learned through practice and tradition. Remedies are applied with care: poultices, herbs, warm compresses. Even when illness persists, the measured rhythm of care provides both structure and quiet solace. Observing this from a distance, it is strangely soothing. Human effort, persistence, and attention moving gently through difficult circumstances. A gentle anecdote: a nobleman complains of a headache, and the physician suggests a fragrant herb or a small poultice. The noble sighs, takes the treatment, and the day continues. Minor ailments and minor remedies dominate much of life quietly, without drama, yet forming a subtle rhythm of observation, care, and repetition. Now drift to a village midwife. She tends to mothers giving birth, often with little fanfare, but with focused, deliberate skill. She applies, compresses, offers quiet advice, and monitors progress patiently. Birth is risky, yes, but it is approached with calm, repetitive attention, and practical knowledge, even in danger. Rhythm and observation offer a kind of gentle predictability amidst uncertainty. Imagine the careful preparation of herbal remedies. Roots, flowers, and leaves are selected, chopped, and combined slowly. Each step requires attention, measurement, timing, and gentle handling. The act itself is calming, rhythmic, and almost meditative, whether the remedy cures or fails. Knowledge passes from generation to generation, quietly preserved in repetition, habit, and observation. Consider minor illnesses in daily life: fevers, colds, digestive issues. Villagers and nobles alike rely on patterns of care, rest, and observation. Hot water, light diets, herbal teas, and quiet attention provide structure, even when outcomes are unpredictable. The acts themselves create a gentle rhythm, soft gestures, repeated routines, and slow attentiveness forming the heartbeat of medieval care. Finally, picture a quiet evening after a day of tending the sick. Fires burn softly, herbs dry in kitchens, and attendants rest. Patients sleep, caretakers sit quietly, and the pulse of care continues invisibly. Life in the medieval world may be unpredictable, but it pulses with small, repeated actions, subtle patterns, and human attentiveness. Observing this rhythm from the present, you notice calm, perseverance, and gentle care quietly shaping daily life. Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're drifting slowly into the quieter, studious corners of medieval life, the rhythm of learning, apprenticeships, and scholarly work. Nothing dramatic, no epic discoveries, just the steady, repetitive patterns of minds at work, slowly shaping knowledge, skill, and culture. So settle in, breathe slowly, and let's float gently through these soft, intellectual moments. Imagine a young apprentice in a workshop, perhaps learning to be a blacksmith, a carpenter, or a weaver. Each day follows a repetitive rhythm. Observe, imitate, practice, correct mistakes, and start again. The work is slow, deliberate, and patient. Success comes in small increments, perfecting a hinge, smoothing a board, or hammering a shape correctly. Every repetition builds skill, endurance, and quiet confidence. Forming the subtle heartbeat of vocational learning, now drift to a small monastery or cathedral school. Students sit quietly, copying manuscripts or memorizing prayers and lessons. The rhythm is slow and meditative. Pen scratches parchment. Lips move silently in repetition. Eyes trace lines of Latin text. Mistakes are corrected carefully. Lessons repeated patiently. The pulse of education is gentle and repetitive, almost hypnotic, but deeply formative. Knowledge accumulates slowly, shaped by careful attention and quiet diligence. Picture a scholar's chamber. Books are stacked, ink stains the table, and quills scratch across parchment. The scholar works alone, interrupted only by soft footsteps or the occasional flicker of candlelight. Each line copied, each note jotted, and each calculation checked forms part of a deliberate pattern. Learning is slow, repetitive, and solitary, but its rhythm shapes ideas, preserves knowledge, and quietly influences the world outside. Consider apprentices in bustling towns. They learn trades by observing, practicing, and repeating, often under the watchful eye of a master. Hours are long, movements deliberate, and mistakes expected. Each day reinforces skill and habit. Apprenticeships are gentle. Continuous training, repetition, subtle correction, and careful observation forming the backbone of medieval craftsmanship and commerce now. Drift to informal education, storytelling, oral history, and local knowledge. Children listen to elders recount legends, advice, or history, absorbing information slowly through repetition. Lessons are embedded in narratives, remembered not through textbooks, but through rhythm, pattern, and memory. Even in the absence of formal schooling, knowledge passes down in quiet, patterned ways. Imagine evening in a quiet scriptorium. Candles flicker, ink dries slowly, and the sound of quills scratching fills the air. Students and monks copy text, check calculations, and reflect silently. The rhythm is gentle and almost hypnotic. Observe, write, correct, repeat. Even when progress is slow, repetition ensures mastery, continuity, and subtle influence across time. A gentle anecdote. A young scribe accidentally spills ink on a valuable manuscript. Panic is brief, and careful corrections restore the page. The lesson: patience, precision, and slow, steady attention. These small incidents quietly shape character, skill, and routine, forming a subtle rhythm that governs the life of a scholar. Finally, picture a library at dusk. Candles flicker, dust motes float lazily, and silent shelves hold centuries of accumulated knowledge. Scholars, apprentices, and curious visitors move slowly, absorbing information at their own pace. Life is repetitive, quiet, and deliberate, but profoundly human. The rhythm of study, copying, and reflection pulses gently through these spaces, shaping medieval life in subtle, unseen ways. Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're drifting slowly through the echoes of medieval life, the structures, trade routes, festivals, and small innovations that linger quietly into our modern world. Nothing dramatic, no towering battles, just gentle, patterned glimpses of continuity, repetition, and human persistence. So, settle in, breathe slowly, and let's float gently through these subtle threads of history. Imagine a medieval town square. Stone buildings line narrow streets, wooden shutters creak, and small shops hum quietly with activity. Even centuries later, echoes remain in modern architecture. Archways, stone facades, and cobbled streets remind us of patterns, repetition, and human adaptation. Every stone laid carried intention, habit, and slow craftsmanship. Observing these remnants from the present, you notice subtle continuity rhythm of human presence, repeated labor, and enduring design. Now drift to trade routes. Goods slowly travel from village to village, town to town, across rivers and mountains. Spices, wool, grain, and textiles move in repetitive patterns dictated by season, geography, and custom. Markets emerge, commerce hums quietly, and small stories of transactions ripple through communities. Trade is not glamorous, is repetitive, careful, and quietly influential, linking people through subtle, enduring patterns. Consider festivals and rituals. Even today, some customs trace back to medieval celebrations, harvest feasts, seasonal dances, and quiet religious observances. Music, dance, and communal gatherings repeat across centuries, a soft pulse linking past to present. These rituals are gentle anchors, maintaining rhythm and human connection across time. Life may have changed, but the echoes of repetition, social structure, and minor celebration endure quietly. A gentle anecdote. Imagine a town wall repaired with care over decades. Each stone is placed carefully, sometimes replaced, sometimes adjusted. Over generations, maintenance continues. Subtle mistakes corrected, rhythms preserved. Architecture, like life itself, reflects patience, repetition, and the quiet accumulation of small actions. Observing it today, you see echoes of countless ordinary people working steadily in the background. Picture a medieval festival. Merchants set up stalls, musicians play, and villagers gather to celebrate seasonal milestones. Children mimic adult gestures, storytellers repeat familiar tales, and patterns of rhythm emerge naturally. Even when centuries pass, echoes remain. Fairs, parades, and celebrations continue in modified form, a soft, continuous thread linking medieval life to modern experience. Now drift to small innovations. A water wheel turns slowly, powering a mill. Techniques, methods, and patterns repeat over decades, quietly shaping work, food production, and community rhythm. Knowledge passes subtly from one generation to the next, forming a continuous hypnotic pattern of human effort and adaptation. These repetitive, practical inventions carry forward the pulse of medieval life into our modern world. Consider quiet daily routines preserved in memory and tradition. Meals, festivals, religious observances, and community gatherings follow slow, predictable patterns. Even when the tools and language change, the underlying rhythm, the repetition, attention, and human behavior remains. Observing these echoes is strangely soothing, the pulse of continuity, subtle persistence, and human care quietly threading through centuries. Finally, imagine reflecting on the world today. Modern cities, streets, and markets carry whispers of medieval life. Structures, rituals, festivals, and patterns endure subtly, reminding us that repetition, patience, and attention to detail form the heartbeat of human history. From the comfort of your modern bed, you can float safely above time, noticing echoes, patterns, and gentle rhythms quietly persisting across centuries. Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're drifting into the final stretch of our journey through medieval life, gently reviewing the patterns, quirks, and rhythms we've observed over the last several hours. No drama, no chaos, just a slow, reflective glide through centuries of human habit, repetition, and quiet persistence. So dim the lights, settle in, and let's float one last time through the soft pulse of history. Imagine waking slowly in a medieval castle, or a village, or a quiet scriptorium. The same rhythms play out, servants adjusting bedding, candles flickering, animals moving quietly, students tracing letters with careful attention, and markets humming softly with familiar voices. Repetition rules, small gestures, minor routines, and daily habits quietly structuring life. Even mistakes, mishaps, and minor scandals fall into a gentle pattern, absorbed and corrected by time and attention. Drift now to festivals, rituals, and seasonal celebrations. Villagers dancing, royals arranging embroidered threads. Craftsmen honing skills, scholars copying manuscripts. All actions are gentle repetitions, quietly building knowledge, tradition, and culture. Life in every corner is shaped by these rhythms. Small, deliberate gestures repeated day after day, year after year. Observing them is like watching the slow turning of a great clock, each tick measured, steady, and purposeful. Consider illness and care. Herbs are crushed, poultices applied, prayers whispered, attention given. Each act, however minor, contributes to a rhythm of human effort and empathy. Medicine, superstition, and care all combine into a subtle, hypnotic pattern, repeating endlessly, shaping lives with quiet persistence. Even when outcomes are uncertain, the process itself offers comfort, structure, and gentle continuity. Now float over trade, markets, and apprenticeships. Stones are laid carefully, cloth woven slowly, tools mastered through repetition. Markets hum with routine. Apprentices learn patiently, and the pulse of commerce quietly threads through daily life. These small, repeated actions are the heartbeat of medieval society. Subtle but essential, linking people across time and space. Reflect on architecture, libraries, manuscripts, and chronicles. Every wall built, every book copied, every record preserved contributes to a slow accumulation of human effort and memory. Repetition is everywhere. The measured stroke of a quill, the careful placement of a stone, the gentle rhythm of communal tasks. Even centuries later, these acts echo softly, reminding us of the persistent, steady pulse of human endeavor. Finally, imagine nights settling across villages and castles. Fires burn low, animals rest, and humans drift into quiet reflection and sleep. The minor dramas, quirks, and routines of the day dissolve into gentle patterns. Life in the medieval world, harsh, repetitive, and full of small moments, moves forward quietly, gently, and with subtle humor. observing it from a modern bed. You notice calm persistence, minor absurdities, and the hypnotic rhythm of humanity through centuries. So tonight, as you drift fully into sleep, imagine the soft, repeating patterns of medieval life: smoke curling, quills scratching, markets humming, festivals unfolding, herbs crushed, embroidery stitched, small mishaps corrected, and knowledge preserved. You wouldn't survive a day there, but from your cozy modern bed, you can float above centuries, observing calm, gentle rhythms, minor quirks, and quiet persistence, the enduring heartbeat of human history. And with that, we slowly close the book on our long, hypnotic journey through medieval life. Let your mind drift, your breathing slow, and let the gentle pulse of the past carry you softly into dreams. Good night, and thanks for floating back through time with me. Sleep well.